Shalom, my fellow sovereign Hebrew Israelites. I am Akish Faraj, a mighty lion of the tribe Judah, of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, many of my people don't understand just how much power we have and may be afraid to step up to declare their sovereignty to the government that oppresses and afflict our people. They feel that we have to follow Roman civil law, when Roman civil law is nothing but color of law that continues to kill our people. The Most High has never told his people to be subject to a government whose law kills his people with impunity. Romans chapter 13 verse 1 says, "Let every soul be subject unto our higher powers, for there is no power but of Ahayah. The powers that be are ordained of Ahayah." That does not mean that once we wake up to the truth of our oppressor's deception of being so-called African Americans, we are to continue to follow Roman civil law that kills his people with impunity. That would be total foolish and stupidity. I am not telling anyone to go out and kill anyone. But even Moses, after waking up from his illusion of being an Egyptian, went against Egyptian law that he was under at the time and murdered an Egyptian that was beating one of his brethren. Exodus chapter 2 verse 11 through 12 says, "And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens. And he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that way. And when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand." If Moses would have been afraid to speak to Pharaoh, would have been afraid to stand up against Egypt government laws, our ancestors would have never exited the first time. Acts chapter 7 verse 22 says, "And Moses was well learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and in deeds." When you know the law, you don't have to ask, do we need permits to speak out? Can you do something? You know you can. You can do it, and you just do it and deal with what comes next. Don't give your sovereignty, your authority away to anyone, not even to the federal government. We stand under the sovereign law of our Father in heaven and common law here on earth. In 1871, the District of Columbia, D.C., was created. At the same time, a new constitution was adopted by the 41st Congress, which without authority or authorization, let me say that one more time, without authority or authorization, granted itself the status of a corporation to operate within the 10 dedicated miles of Washington, District of Columbia. You see, Washington, known as the District of Columbia, with its 10 miles granted through Congress without authority or authorization, made itself a federal corporation whose laws many of our people feel that they have to follow. If they had no authority or authorization to do what they did, why do you believe why do you believe that you have to have a permit to be on so-called federal government property, or to be quiet when you speak out while on that so-called federal government property? That's totally ludicrous and makes no sense. Understand that if you have to ask for permission, then that also means you must ask for permission to reside in Washington, D.C., which is a federal corporation occupied by foreigners. We Hebrew Israelites have just as much right to be in any part of that land without permits, and to speak on any part of that land without permits as anyone else. The United States Corporation exists only within the district under the new Constitution of 1871 as a corporation. It is bound and ruled by commercial contract law, not by the common law of the people. President Lincoln suspended the Constitution, the one we think we operate under, during the Civil War and established martial law. Yeah, that's right. That order has never been retracted or rescinded as required under the Lieber Code. That's Lieber Code. The Lieber Code of April 24th, 1863, also known as Instructions for the Government of Armies of the United States in the Field, General Order Number 100, or Lieber Instructions, was an instruction signed by President Abraham Lincoln to the Union forces of the United States during the American Civil War that dedicated how soldiers should conduct themselves in wartime. Its name reflects its author, the German-American legal scholar and political philosopher Franz Lieber. There has been no declaration of peace nor any treaties between the newly adopted Constitution and the occupied people of the formerly sovereign states to retract the order. We Hebrew Israelites, as so-called African Americans, Negroes, black, colored, etc., have effectively been in a state of occupation, but perpetrated by the corporation operating in the District of Columbia, known as the United States, or as United States of America, a corporation. This is opposed to the collection of sovereign states known as the United States. Capitalization is an important point to take note of here. Capitis, diminutia, that's capitis, diminutia, diminutio, maxima, meaning a maximum loss of status or civil death for the individual. Through the use of capitalization, John Doe, or Doe John, the individual with rights is reduced to slave status with no rights, or in this case, to a corporate trust as an entity who can own nothing. This is why any correspondence with federal agency which have to do with taxes or legal issues with the government will have your name capitalized. You know, like on your birth certificate, your social security card, your driver's license, so on and so forth, your bills. This capitalization is a notice to you that as so-called African Americans, Negroes, blacks, or colored, and not Hebrew Israelites, you are corporately held trust. You are a corporately held trust, no different than any other commodity, and have no mankind status. You will appear in an administrative court rather than a judicial court, and cannot use the Constitution to defend yourself, because it does not apply to us as so-called African Americans, Negroes, blacks, or colors. And the Uniform Commercial Code will be administered as per contract, commercial law, not the common law. See, you must know understand the difference between common law and civil law. Civil law is no law. The original source of the common law system can be traced back to the English monarchy, which used to issue formal orders called writs when justice needed to be done. Because writs were not sufficient to cover all situations, courts of equity were ultimately established to hear complaints and devise appropriate remedies based on equitable principles taken from many sources of authority, such as Roman law and natural law. As these decisions were collected and published, it became possible for courts to look up presidential opinions and apply them to current cases, and thus the common law developed. Civil law in other European nations, on the other hand, is generally traced back to the code of laws complied by the Roman Emperor Justinian around 600 CE. Authoritative legal codes with roots in the laws are others than developed over many centuries various countries leading to similar legal systems, each with their own sets of laws. There have not been any judges in America since 1789. There are only administrators. This is why so-called judges are appointed and not elected. Administrators, not judges, are appointed by federal and state officials to administer commercial contract law using the Uniform Commercial Code, better known as the UCC, which I guess would explain how people with no law background become judges. Judges administer the law, while administrators administer code and statutes. Commercial contract law, UCC, is used to override the common law that we believe we are living under via the Constitution. The court system here in New Egypt, the United States, are nothing more than a web of administrative courts which administer the law of permits contracts. In order for the law of contracts to apply to you, you must first enter into giving your sovereignty away, a contract with a corporation, in this case the United States, a corporation. To enter to this giving your sovereignty away contract, you simply have to register to vote, file a birth certificate, apply for government provided benefits of any kind, get a driver's license, apply for a business license, pay a fee for permission to use or access government-owned properties, such as going on the property like the Capitol, in front of the White House or the UN. See, when you ask for permission, you give away your sovereignty. No, you don't have to do that. There's no instances when your interaction with what we know is as the United States, a corporation, does not result in you automatically being entered into a contract with said corporation. Once done, you have ceased to be a Hebrew Israelite in the eyes of the government, and now are reduced to a corporate trust, an entity with no sovereignty, and vulnerable and subject to the law of contracts. How does this happen? Ever hear of something called an adhesion contract? These are contracts with irrevocable terms which never change. Each and every time you sign your name for taxes, licenses, or ask for government benefits, you are in effect renewing the contract. This renewal or even first time signing is a statement to the effect that you agree to the control of the federal government. A corporation controlled by contract law and have forfeited your rights, your sovereignty, to constitutional protections. In the cases of taxes, unless you sign the W-2 or the Form 1040 or any of the other forms, in essence, agreeing to the contract, you are not obligated to pay. The one advantage to all this is that under the laws of contracts, you are a signatory, must be informed in advance of all provisions of the contract. In lie of this, you can revoke your signature and be repaid all funds paid into Social Security and taxes going back to the original and first time you entered into the contract unknowingly. See, this is what we're talking about. This is how we're supposed to get our gold when we exit it. This is we want to cash in all these Federal Reserve notes that they given us for our gold, for true money. We want to give them back this monopoly money. So you should also be made aware that citizens of the United States include only those people living within the corporate 10-mile boundary of the District of Columbia. See? Yeah, that's right. Using this basis for defining who was and was not a citizen enabled the changes to the original Trading with the Enemies Act of 1917. Trading with the Enemies Act of 1917. Under the original law, it described enemies of the state as other than citizens of the United States. Section 2, Subdivision C, Chapter 106. Trading with the Enemy Act of October 6, 1917. 40 Statute L. 411. Amended March 9th, 1933, Chapter 106, Section 5, Subdivision B. Any person within the United States. H.R. 1491, public number 1. Notice in both cases, the United States is not capitalized, so neither version of this act is applied to the corporation known as the United States or the United States of America. It applies to the common citizen of the occupied collective state of the United States. So all this time, I, who prided myself on actually reading the Constitution, assuring myself that I knew what my rights were as so-called African Americans, Negroes, blacks, or colors, what the laws were, and thoroughly convinced that a return to the Constitution will reverse all the devastation heaped on us, Hebrew Israelites, by one corrupt administration after another, one spineless Congress after another, have had to admit that we have no options left to us. We sovereign Hebrew Israelites that are now waking up to the truth must now understand that we must refuse to continue to exist in servitude to the corporation known as New Egypt, the United States. We Hebrew Israelites may go to Washington, D.C. to confront those that have given us a fake so-called African American, etc. nationality and identity as it is written. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 4. Thou even thyself shalt discontinue from thy heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thy enemies in a land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled a fire in anger, which shall burn forever. We may go to the United Nations building in Washington, D.C. with our Royal Hebrew Israelite national flag to confront those nations that took crafty counsel against us during the transatlantic slave trade as it is written. Psalms chapter 83, verse 1 through 5. Keep not thou silence, O Ahayah. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O Ahayah. For lo, thy enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. We may go to the Capitol in Washington, D.C., also to confront those that took crafty counsel against us and given us fake so-called African American, etc. identities as it is written. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 4. Thou even thyself shalt discontinue thy heritage that I give thee, and will cause thee to serve thy enemies in a land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled a fire in my anger, which shall burn forever. However, my fellow Hebrew Israelites, my fellow sovereign Hebrew Israelites, it is imperative that we mobilize, move, and unite as one nation of Hebrew Israelites in front of the White House, in mass numbers with our flag as it is written. Isaiah chapter 13, verse 2. Lift up ye up a banner upon the high mountains. Exalt the voice unto them. Shake the hand, that they may go into the gates of the nobles. My fellow Hebrew Israelites, it is also imperative that we confront modern-day Pharaoh Obama and the whole world in front of the White House, united daily until we exodus to our own land for the second and last time. Isaiah chapter 11, verse 11 through 12. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Most High shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel. The nations he speak of is Judah and Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Once again, I am Akish Faraj, a sovereign Hebrew Israelite, lion of the tribe Judah, of the 12 tribes of Israel. Quam, my people. Quam. Shalom.